This episode of Victims and Villains is dedicated to the memory of Dino Gangall. Dino was the host of the podcast, we've played their spots a couple times during the episodes, and Dino recently died suddenly, and in his words, be excellent to one another. This is the Victims and Villains podcast, a podcast dedicated to educating and engaging individuals in mental health awareness and suicide prevention through pop culture. Rest in peace, Dino.
Hey everybody, this is Dino with her podcast.
And Michelle. I almost cut you off there.
That's okay. We just want to let you know that you can find us at gangalley.com.
Like a gang in an alley. Gangalley.com.
We're on iHeartRadio, Podbean, Spotify, Podcast Addict, Pocket Cast, Breaker, Double Pod, Apple, and we have a YouTube channel for supplemental material. But what do we normally talk about?
Oh gosh, everything, honestly.
Yeah.
We touch on whatever is poignant that week.
Yeah. We wrap it into movies, TV, pop culture, whoever's ticking us off.
Ticking me off,
social media toxicity, but we always have one important message.
The most important message.
Be decent to each other. So check us out.
Podcast.
Peace.
You might be asking yourself, why in the middle of April are we randomly covering a Friday the 13th movie and breaking tradition? Well, that's because there's only one Friday the 13th this year, and Anthony and I, we got together after the last one and said, you know what, we just need to make our own Friday, and we're talking about part 6, Jason Lives. And this is the first time that I'm coming into a recording having seen the entire saga of Friday the 13th. I've seen every franchise entry now. I'm no longer green. I have now experience with you. So what's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on? First off, congratulations on getting through the entire saga. I thought it was very commendable that you were trying to only watch one at a time as we were recording these, because getting your comments on them one at a time was interesting. But now that concept is completely blown out of the water. No pun intended, with the Jason movie we're about to talk about. So so it should be an interesting perspective, at least from your side now that you've seen them all.
Yeah, I started this thing last year in quarantine where I would just kind of pick a film franchise that I hadn't seen. And it started with Hellraiser. I did all 10 films, and also read the Scarlet Gospels, which is the literary sequel to Hellbound Heart, which is the original movie is based on from Clive Barker. And then I worked my way again through the Saw franchise. And then I came across a listing for the Scream Factory's Blu-ray box set last year, right after Christmas. And I had Christmas money to burn, so I was like, I'm just going to take the plunge, and I'm just going to dive right into all of these. And I knocked them out within like a week or so, maybe 2 weeks. But there's like a certain point where they just get progressively worse.
Yeah, I mean, that's what happens with any franchise. I think the longer you go on, the worse they're going to get, unless you decide to do something really creative and flip the script on them. Like, a good example for me is Nightmare on Elm Street. When they got to the 7th part, which is New Nightmare, and they made it a completely different concept and story, it was awesome. Like, it was awesome. It was original and everything like that. So few franchises are able to kind of figure out a way to reinvent themselves to keep them interesting. So you just get that constant, you're just on this ladder, just going down all the time, because it's like, how do you one up the one you do before? And in most horror franchises, it's you kill more people, and that only carries you so far.
Yeah, and we'll get into some of the Jason's quote unquote reinventions as the film series moves forward, especially with the seventh part, because I have some strong feelings about New Blood, but
that's for another time. This is for another time.
Let's go. Where it's coming in a couple months. Promise you guys. Just teasing to the listeners there. This is one that the first time I watched it, I remember texting you, and I was texting you as I was watching this, so you were getting like my in real time.
Yes.
And you talked about in part 5 when we recorded the A New Beginning about how maybe it was after we got done recording, but you were like, I really want to see your reaction to the way that they bring Jason back. Because by this point, Jason's pretty dead at this point, and I really got to say that let's just jump in there, because the way
let's recap 4 really quickly, because
let's do that.
There's a way. So at the end of part 4, because part 5, Jason wasn't Jason. It was the ambulance driver, so it had nothing to do with Jason. At the end of part 4, Tommy, a young Tommy played by Corey Feldman, shaves his head, to distract Jason, and then his sister Trish takes a machete, slams it up the side of his head. It goes into his eye. He falls to the ground. The machete kind of goes through his head as he falls to the ground, and then Tommy eventually picks up the machete and then keeps slashing Jason over and over again. So that's how he died in part 4. And that's where this one picks up several years later. It's still with Tommy. Now, Tommy was in part 5, and he was in a mental health facility, quote unquote, whatever that thing was, that retreat was. But so we're with an adult Tommy at this point at the beginning of 6.
So, fun fact for you, I don't know if you knew this, but the actor that portrayed Tommy-Jarvis in part 5, the filmmakers of Jason Lives approached him to reprise the role, and he actually turned it down. Do you know why he turned it down?
I do not know why he turned it down.
He had a newfound faith in Jesus Christ, and kind of felt it demoralized his belief system to come back for a 6th installment to do horror. So I think he actually left acting altogether after that.
Oh, wow. Okay. Hey, to each his own, right?
Yeah. So this one picks up, like you said, like few years after the events, probably like 10 years, I would say, after. And there's still like some kind of like nods to part 5. Yep. With like throwaway lines, and basically like I have it down literally in my notes that Jason is literally maggots, spider webs, and a decaying corpse, but yet somehow he is able to like just come alive, and they really worked so hard to suspend disbelief to bring him back a la Frankenstein with a post from a gate and electricity. It's probably the cheesiest part of the entire movie, and I'm glad that they put it right in the beginning, because it is hard and it feels out of tone from the rest of the movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, they needed to come up with a clever way to bring him back, because remember, at this point, Jason had been dead for several years, obviously, because in part 5, Tommy had grown up. So it's like, how do you bring him back after several years? He couldn't have just been like, oh, he wasn't really dead and he was just kind of hiding somewhere. So, so the filmmakers came up with, what's the best way we can do this? Oh, we'll just Frankenstein him. A little electricity, restarts the heart that's really not beating, and off we go.
It's interesting, too, that after all these years, like at this moment in time, Tommy has to see and has to make sure that Jason's like actually dead. Mm-hmm. Like I kind of want to know like what went off in his mind at like that moment. It says, you know what, I've been struggling with anxiety and like sleeplessness for 10 years. Like, just now is the time where I have to see definitively if Jason is really dead.
Yeah, and I think there's really no answer to that because we don't get that. We just get the fact that he left his whatever mental health place he was at, or whatever location he was at, because I think the friend with him mentions it in the beginning. Mm-hmm. But we never really know why all of a sudden now is the time for him to go, oh yeah, I need to check and make sure he's dead. So no answer there.
I'm almost kind of curious because when we talk in part five is him really dealing a lot with the delusions and kind of seeing Jason and being haunted by his ghosts and kind of memory and the traumatic events of that night as a boy. And I'm almost kind of curious if the filmmakers were kind of like, we're going to take this like same concept and cherry pick this part of part 5 and bring it into part 6, because there are very minor parts from part 5 that are brought into part 6, but it's very, very minor, to say the least.
Yeah, I mean, basically they pulled what little they needed to from part 5 in order to get the Tommy character back. That's really that was their only purpose for doing it.
This actor too, like I wish I really had written his name down. I don't have it.
I'll look it up spoiler. Right now. So
I would argue that he, for me, is, at least from me, he is the definitive version of this character. Like, Corey Feldman did great with what he had, and it really brought a whole lot of personality to him as a character. But I think this actor just really brings the depth and emotion that part 5 lacked from this character. And I really think that they really just did a number for him as a character.
Well, his name, the actor's name was Tom Matthews.
That's it. Yeah.
So, and I remember seeing him before I saw Friday the 13th Part 6. I saw another cult classic horror movie that he was in called Return of the Living Dead, if you've ever seen that.
I have not, but it's been on my list.
Yeah, I was just going to say that could be the next franchise for you to go through. Return of the Living Dead was one of those movies I watched so many times as a kid because my dad had it recorded it on VHS and I was just obsessed with it. So I saw that movie like dozens of times. But the actor who plays Tommy here was actually one of the leads in that movie.
Jumping on that cult status, he does a great job in this movie. Like, legitimately, I feel like he's probably one of the best actors that we've seen in the franchise thus far. And yes, that's even including Kevin Bacon.
Well, Kevin Bacon, that was his first film, so you got to forgive Kevin Bacon for that a little bit.
I mean, if you say so. This movie, if you can't tell, I really enjoyed this movie. I'm really excited to talk about it. This movie actually does something I really wish that they would have brought forth in more installments in the franchise, and that is the James Bond tribute. So good. It's so quick, but it's freaking fantastic.
Well, since I'm not a big James Bond fan, you're going to have to explain it to me.
So the James Bond gag is Jason basically kind of like walking on the screen, and then he slashes it, and the screen kind of goes entirely red, and then you have the title sequence. I really wish that they would have brought that in there. Like, I'm not the hugest James Bond fan, but I'm a pop culture nerd when it comes down to it at the end of the day, and I really thought that more films could have kind of benefited from that fun little gag that they do, that they just kind of throw it there in the beginning. It's so random, but yet if you know what it is, like, it's really awesome. I think it fits more in tone with Freddy than it actually does Jason.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's interesting though. I can't imagine that many people would even make that connection and be like, oh yeah, that's just like a James Bond movie. Very weird to compare James Bond with Jason. Something only you would do, Josh.
That's what it is though. It's James Bond, and I mean, like, that I'm pretty sure, like, that opening like thing, I don't even know it's what to call it. Like, it's not exactly like a gag, but it's like that opening homage. Like the Simpsons have done it. I mean, it's just been done by multiple different pop culture properties. But it seems out of tone again for the not only the franchise and him as a character, but also at the same time, it feels out of tone for the rest of the movie. It's like the prologue to this film has a specific tone, and the rest of it just kind of has its like a more grounded, serious tone once Jason gets resurrected.
Yeah, and I think that's the reason why they separated it with the opening credits. Because if you watch, all the other Friday the 13th movies, it starts generally with the opening credits and we just move on. This is the one where you get that opening scene with Tommy resurrecting Jason accidentally, and then we get the opening credits. And I do think that they did that on purpose because it was so, one, it was so different from, the rest of the film, and two, it was also like, it's almost like, when you watch a television show, and a television show, some television shows have like that cold open where you get a quick scene and then you get the credits to the show, so it's almost like that, or a teaser in a way where it's like, okay, we're just bringing Jason back in the first 5 minutes and then we're off to the races.
Yeah. And you kind of get to explore a little bit more before you get to see Jason. Obviously you get to see Tommy-Jarvis re-enter society, for lack of a better word. And how did you feel about the name change of Camp Crystal Lake? There's a scene where obviously everyone, Camp Crystal Lake is no longer Crystal Lake. It's now
Camp Forest Green.
Camp Forest Green, or like when you talk about what happened at Camp Crystal Lake, it's always Camp Blood. Yep. And the sheriff mentioned that, when people think about this town, they don't want to be synonymous with murder. They don't want to be synonymous with the Voorhees. So they changed it to something that's very uplifting and very kind of calming, which is so far from what we get in here. How did you kind of feel about that name change, though?
Well, I did, I like the fact that, like, to me, that was just like the smart thing to do. And, the one issue I always have with horror movies is they tend, especially like these types of like, franchises, they tend to steer away from making smarter decisions. And I think, to me, that was one of the better ones, because it's like, hey, you know what? A bunch of people have been murdered here several times. Maybe we shouldn't call it Crystal Lake anymore, since everybody knows what happened here. So I liked the change. I thought it was a clever change, but at the same time, it's like, obviously you learn there's no running away from the history of Camp Crystal Lake, because Jason never runs away from it. He always goes towards it.
So in preparation for this episode, I went back and listened to all 5 of the episodes we did previously.
You have too much free time, man.
I listen to podcasts as a part of my job. So at this point, I have about 8 hours a day that I can listen to stuff.
You are very committed to your job, sir.
Thank you. And one of the things that I noticed in I think it was the 3rd episode we did, which covered the 3D, was finding the depth in these movies. And
yes,
if there's anything that I'm good at is being able to take something as seemingly shallow as Friday the 13th and bring in some depth. And one of the things that I think when you're talking about camp, the camp and / town name change, is not only is it a smart narrative decision, not only is it kind of this film makes a lot of very smart decisions that I want to talk about. But I think for me it's a great, allegory for what it's like, you to sometimes, go through things like depression. Like, you can't just run away. Like, you can't just kind of seemingly just like change your name and or town or what you wear, because eventually you're still you at the end of the day. And that's kind of one of the things that we've learned here. And I would encourage people listening right now that to embrace the change, but do it in a healthy way that is going to actually bring legitimate change, and not just change that is going to be temporal and fleeting, but change that's actually going to improve your mental health and your situation.
Yeah, I think you make a good point there, because you can only deny things and pretend it doesn't exist all you want. It's still going to be there, and it's still going to be ingrained in the history. It's kind of like, if you want to compare it to something in real life, Roanoke, Virginia, right? Everybody knows, like, people who know Roanoke know the story of like all the settlers that just magically disappeared one night in Roanoke. And it's like one of those things where you can't escape those things. You just have to accept those things and then figure out how to move on from it. And granted, I love the fact that you try to add depth to these horror movies, when I guarantee you, I'm 99% sure none of the filmmakers ever thought psychologically that this is why we're doing it. They would probably just tell you, why did you change the name? Because a bunch of people got murdered there. They don't want anybody to know. It's like, who's going to send their kid to Camp Crystal Lake? It's like, you have all these kids in the cabins and stuff like that. Yeah, I know you would, but no other sane parent would send their kid to Camp Crystal Lake. So you change it to Camp Forest Green. We're all good. Nobody knows the difference, and off you go. So, but yeah, no, I see your point in the allegorical sense. I just don't think that that's exactly what they were intending.
Well, that's why listeners come to Victims and Villains.
It's true.
Is to get the depth out of these movies.
Yeah, and no. That's why I always love the perspective that you bring, because you touch on things that nobody would ever touch on in a horror movie.
Yeah, and that's kind of the whole thing too, is the whole crux. And I feel like I can't speak for it, but a lot of being and changing the name, we talked about this in our Simpsons episode. Ironically enough, there's an episode of The Simpsons where Homer finds out that there's a television character that's named after him who is a bumbling doofus. And he changes his name to Max Power. And he thinks that if I just change my name, then all of this stuff, I can outrun all of this stuff. Mm-hmm. And he comes to find out that it brings a whole new set of problems. And in that same vein, you can change the name of this town, but eventually those problems always come back to bite you. And that's the way I think it is. That is the way it is when it comes to depression, suicidal tendencies, addiction, alcoholism, PTSD, assault, a number of other things that impact our mental health, is that we can do things that can distract us for a small period of time or deny them, but in the end, they always still come back to haunt us. We have to figure out ways to live simultaneously with ghosts, for lack of a better word, or find ways to cope healthily via counseling or making amends or just whatever. I want to encourage people, if you guys are listening and maybe this was kind of the encouragement or the push that you needed, click the links in the descriptions below to check out our mental health resource library.
But yeah, no, I think everything that you're saying, makes a great deal of sense. Running away from your problems doesn't do anything. If anything, live your life like Jason. Jason confronts his problems head on. It's like, what does he always do when he comes back to life? He heads right back to Camp Crystal Lake. And what does he do? He goes right back to what he was doing before. It's like, and he does not miss a beat. Be like Jason Voorhees, everyone.
Wear a mask, yeah.
Wear a mask, whatever. Wear a mask, carry a machete, walk through the woods and magically catch up to people who are running.
If you or someone you know is listening to this podcast right now and you're struggling with suicide, addiction, self-harm, or depression, we encourage you guys to please reach out. This is the heartbeat of why we do what we do. Suicide is currently the 10th leading cause of death in the United States, and as of this recording, there are 132 suicides that take place each and every day on American soil. And when you scale back internationally, there are 800,000 successful suicides. That is one death roughly every 40 seconds. So if you or someone you know is struggling, you guys can go to victimsandvillains.net/hope. That resource is going to be right in the description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this. There you'll find resources that include the National Suicide Lifeline, which is 1-800-273-8255. You can also text help to 741-741. We also have a plethora of other resources, including churches, getting connected with counselors, LGBT resources like the Trevor Project, and also veteran hotline as well. Please, if you hear nothing else in the show, understand that you listening to this right now, have value and worth. We get it. Suicide, depression, mental health, these are hard topics, and the stigma around them doesn't make it any easier. But please consider the resources right in the descriptions below, wherever you guys are listening, because once again, you have value and you have worth. So please stay with us.
No, I think that this movie, though, is we get to kind of see a glimpse at what horror would be a few years later. And it's this very, very quick moment where you have two counselors that are in they're trying to make it to the Camp Forest Green, and the girl driving stops and she says, "I've seen enough horror movies to know that a weirdo in a mask is a bad idea." And I love that line. It's such a throwaway moment because it's one of the very first gags that we see very early on in this movie, but it's a tiny glimpse at what horror would grow to be through properties like New Nightmare, Scream, and I Know What You Did Last Summer.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's that meta moment where they're actually commenting on a film, they're commenting on a genre that they're actually in, and it's one of those. It's either one of those, you get one of two things out of that. A lot of people will either roll their eyes or you'll point it out and be like, "Oh yeah, you know what? This girl's right, clearly, and she knows well enough," but then, the boyfriend does not. And that just signals the end for them. But it's an interesting comment to make right off the bat. And the other thing too is I also wondered when she said that line if it was an attempt to throw the viewers off into thinking we're about to meet the final girl in the film. Because saying a line like that should immediately call you out to being, oh, is she going to be the survivor girl? Is she going to be the final girl? Because she's already pointing out that she knows when a situation is dangerous. But obviously that was not meant to be.
That's an interesting thing that I didn't even take into consideration. I just got into a podcast called Love What I Love. And the concept is really simple. Basically, a couple will make one another watch a movie that they're very passionate about. And the boyfriend of that, Andy, had his girlfriend, Masha, watch Psycho. And he was talking about how revolutionary it was for the Janet Leigh character to be killed off so quick in the film. Obviously, we would see that a few years later with Drew Barrymore in Scream, and even Bella Thorne in the Scream series as well, for MTV. I didn't even consider that, and I think that would have been an awesome nod for this franchise to do. I think by this point in the series, I think it's probably the only thing that Friday the 13th hasn't done, because Jason already has been to space. We will cover it.
Yep.
We are dreading it.
Are we? Yes,
I am.
Oh no, I totally am.
That might be one of the shortest podcasts ever, or one of the more negative ones. We don't know. But I think that would have been interesting because they do set her up to be kind of the final girl, and it does divert expectations fairly quickly.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. So, and that also, like, I don't know where you want to jump to next, but, or just in general, one of the things that I noticed in this film, and I know, like, every time we watch one, like, I kind of like to gauge where you are in terms of which one has been your favorite. We talk about it all the time. And I remember when you texted me about part 6 and you're like, this one's already my favorite. It's just like, this one's better than all the other ones. And I'm like, all right, cool. I go, it'll be something to talk about, because I told you a while ago that I sometimes flip flop between 4 and 6. Like, I think they're the two strongest ones in the franchise. And I know you didn't care for 4 very much. So, I think with 6, when you're talking about like how great it is, one of the things that I always trip up on in this movie, and I do enjoy this one, it's by far one of the best. What trips me up in the movie is the first like 30 minutes in the movie, we're basically doing like short films of new characters that just get killed off. Like, literally, you can cut up the film into these 5-minute segments of just, here's the drunk guy walking through the woods, and these other two, and these two picnickers. And now we're, and then the couple in the car, the other counselors in the car, they break down. The drunk guy in the woods with the other couple. And then you've got the people that are paintballing. It's like, literally, it's just segment to segment to segment of random people that Jason comes up to and just murders. And I always trip up on that when I watch the movie, because I feel like we're just getting introduced to new people to kill them off within 5 minutes or less.
You're not wrong. And that portion of the film is really what keeps it back from me considering this to be a perfect movie. This by far is my favorite film in the franchise. I had so much fun with this movie, and I think one of my favorite scenes of the ones you're talking about, though, it is the paintballers. When Jason gets shot with the paintballs and he just stops, looks down, and then looks back up at the guy, so offended. It is one of the funniest moments in this movie, but not to be outdone with the reunion to his machete.
Yes.
The reunion to the machete has got to be one of my favorite parts. And he rips the guy's arm off, right?
Yeah, you're talking about the paintballer? No, the guy with the machete?
Yeah, the guy with the machete that's
Yep.
mad that he...
Yeah, and then he throws him into the tree with the smiley face.
Yeah, this that guy definitely deserved it.
Oh yeah.
It's one of the very few scenes in this movie that does not age well. His misogynistic agenda about how women only belong in the kitchen, when this entire retreat, the woman who doesn't even get a name, but she is kind of just like domineering all of these guys in paintball, and
she's awesome.
She's almost a victor, except for the guy with the glasses. Yeah, I really enjoyed that, just kind of seeing his poor sportsmanship. He kind of deserved it, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think so. I think he definitely deserved it. There was no question about that.
But just like Jason's reaction to it, it's such a 1-2 punch moment, like you're talking about, because it's like you have him taking the machete from him, ripping the arm off, and then plop right into the smiley face tree, and then kind of like staring into the just staring at the arm attached to the machete was great too.
Yeah. No, I mean, there are tons of really good moments in this movie. And again, who is Jason without his kills, which is the reason why we had so many random murders in the beginning, because again, it's like, if you don't do that, you don't have you're not going to have a lot of people to kill. But yeah, like I can definitely say, like in terms of like murder moments, there are some good ones in this one.
I think too, the reason that you get all of that first half, the first third of that movie, and the way that it's set up, where it's just Jason kind of just going randomly throughout the entire forest of Forest Green to just kill random bypasses, and the way that it feels like those short films is because of the same exact reason that you had Halloween 4, 5, and 6 be the way that they are. When you look at Season of the Witch, while now it's regarded as a cult classic, at the time, people were disgusted that you would dare call this movie the sci-fi movie a Halloween movie because it didn't have Michael Myers in it. And I think that you got the same reaction to part 5 when it was revealed that it's not Jason creating this havoc, but it's the ambulance driver. And we talked about it in the part 5 episode, but the entire movie results because of a chocolate bar, which is ludicrous. Yep. But I think that you had to really win back fans of Jason. So you're putting these this first half hour in here to win over your fans before you kind of really get to see Jason in his element in Acts 2 and 3.
Yeah. Well, I think in a sense what they were trying to accomplish at a certain point was that this is my guess, that they were trying to move on, right? Part 4 was the end of Jason, but obviously the franchise was popular. They wanted to make another one. So they called part 5 the new chapter, in the sense of maybe what they were going for was going to be every movie moving forward will be a new Jason. It'll just be another copycat picking up the moniker of Jason so we can keep doing slashers. But everybody hated part 5 for the ending that they revealed. And so they were like, okay, we need to go back to the real Jason. And then how do you do that? Here we go. Part 6, Jason lives. And we're off to the races again.
Yeah, it's problematic to kind of, find its footing. But I think once you kind of have Jason in his elements, this film really does start to succeed. And that's not to say that there aren't things within this first act that work really well, because you're setting up the hostility between Tommy and the sheriff, but also his daughter as well.
Yep.
And you're also starting to kind of just get to meet the counselors. And this is the first time in any film up to this point that we've actually seen the counselors be counselors, where we're also seeing them actually be with kids. And I think adding in kids actually adds a brand new level to this film that a lot of the other entries have just really not really taken. And I think that this film took a gamble on adding kids into the equation, and it works really well for them.
Yeah, it ups the stakes. It immediately ups the stakes because you're watching a Jason Voorhees movie, and then you're seeing a camp with actual kids at it, and it's like, holy cow! I'm like, is he going to go back to the camp? Is he going to kill the kids? What the hell is going to happen here? Because we know he kills counselors, but what do you do when you add the dynamic of the kids? I also agree with you that I do think that worked really well, and you actually got to see the counselors interacting with the kids, which was also good because you got to see, and that's the part of the film that I really enjoyed the most, because you felt more towards these counselors than you did in the other films because you didn't get those interactions. So there was a lot more empathy for them.
Yeah, agreed. I really think that it works a lot better in that regards, and it kind of brings a level of almost like wholesome / innocence that I feel like the other 5 entries prior to this really focused on teenagers being having a lot of sex and drinking and partying. Like that's all that teenagers are good for. Whereas this one, you're actually seeing them kind of step into the parental roles.
Yeah.
And
Except for Court.
Except for Court, yeah. There's a level of innocence that's being brought into these characters. Like even the scene where man, I think it was Elizabeth, the only black character in this movie.
No, Elizabeth was she was the, I don't want to say the holier one, you know what I mean? She was the more religious one, I think. The one that you're thinking of is Sissy, I believe.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna back that up and edit that out.
Okay.
There's a scene where Sissy she's hearing noise and she kind of like she wants to play a prank because they think that it's Court, and so she like pours soda on him, and it's like this like innocent just prank that really does kind of capture that spirit of like something that you would see in like say like Heavyweights, where you have kids in a camp and kind of how chaotic they're going to be, but that innocence is juxtaposed to her actual murder when Jason comes through there, and I think that they juxtapose those elements really well.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and that's why, yeah, to your point, it's like there is a sense of empathy for a lot of, like, this was the one film in the franchise where I actually did, with the exception of like one or two other characters, like I actually felt bad when some of them got killed. A lot of times you just see them all set up and you're like, all right, I can't wait to watch these kids die, because you can tell they're all drinking and doing drugs and having sex and all this stuff. They're just doing the cliches, whereas to a lot of these characters, Sissy, Lisbeth, Megan, like a lot of them were more wholesome and more altruistic, so you felt more for them when they actually did die.
Yeah, can we talk about the relationship between Tommy and Megan in this movie?
Sure. What do you want to talk about?
I really enjoyed their chemistry for one, but I also at the same time think that they just had really great timing and kind of like creating the tension between her dad and Tommy, all the while trying to actually stop Jason. Added a lot of just really fun elements to this movie that I feel like we hadn't really seen prior to that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Well, you have the dynamic of the sheriff's daughter, and that's at play. So, it's the daughter who's like, she wants to be her own person, and then she's got the overprotective sheriff as her dad. So you see her kind of playing the bad girl here, and defying him and stuff. And that's what makes her cool, and you're like, okay, I dig her. I like her a lot because she's not just she's not just hiding behind her dad or anything like that. And then to add to it, you do see a chemistry between her and Tommy, and it works really well because she is willing to believe him at face value, whereas her dad doesn't. And to me, that's a combination of two things. One, she's attracted to him, and two, in a small sense, she's defying her father, because her dad is automatically jumping to the conclusion of, oh yeah, no, this guy's a nut job and what he's saying is wrong. And she's more along the lines of, well, you know what? I'm not going to listen to you, Dad. And I like him and he's cute. And I think I'm going to choose to believe him. And it turns out in the end, she was right.
Yeah. Yeah. I really dug the build up to a lot of their stuff. This film had some really great moments with Megan in particular, and just kind of how she's written, and like also like how she conveys emotions, where she's got like that like sassiness to her.
Yep.
I really enjoyed that. I thought that just kind of her on her own, she's a standout character. Whereas a lot of the other characters feel kind of one note. She feels kind of like the most developed, where it kind of feels like a more, I won't say like it's a less radical version of Annie from Halloween, Annie Brackett. Being kind of like, she's like very upfront and just very like brash and bold about like where she stands on stuff. And I think that adding her into the hunt with Tommy to take down Jason just added a whole new level of just pure joy to this movie.
How would you guys like to help us get mental health resources into schools, conventions, and other events? Well, now you can. Simply go to patreon.com/victims and villains for as little as $1 a month. You guys can help us get mental health resources into current and upcoming generations, educate and break down stigma surrounding mental health, suicide, and depression. And you get exclusive content that you can't get anywhere else. And you guys can tell us which Nicolas Cage movie you want us to cover, and we'll do it. All it takes to get started is to go to patreon.com/victims and villains, or simply click the link in the episode description wherever you guys are currently listening or streaming this episode. Pick your tier and get started today. Yes, it's that simple. So quickly select the tier that you want and help us get hope into the hands of the depressed and the suicidal today.
Yeah, no, I agree. And also, the other thing to bear in mind too is this is the first Friday the 13th where the lead, so to speak, is actually a guy. So having Megan, work together with him, fulfilled the standard dynamic we've seen in all of them, where it's always a guy and a girl, right? There's always a guy and a girl. That's kind of how it works. And normally it comes down to the final girl. In this one, it's the final guy and the final girl. So it's really interesting. Well, it's not interesting, but to me, it's smart. It was smart of them to do that because with, and again, this is the 80s and everything like that. This is the 80s horror films and stuff like that. A woman, no matter how much of a fighter you make her, she's still considered more vulnerable, which makes her even stronger in the end when she perseveres. Whereas the guy is usually looked at as, well, the guys are strong and they're the ones that could overpower the killer and everything like that. So it's kind of ironic when they're the ones that always wind up dying and then the final girl winds up surviving. So I thought it was obviously a good move on their part. But again, her character is just fun. She's not just the standard girl who walks through this and survives. Like you can see the fight in her, you can see the sass in her, you can see the wit in her, and it all plays out really well.
Yeah. So there's something that I completely agree with you. And speaking of guys being the final one, and kind of coming back to a more meta nature of this, I'm curious if you picked up on this. So the short film segment that you talk about where Jason is just kind of working his way through the woods, and he actually ends up like murdering like a couple out for a picnic, a undertaker that is also a wino, and just a couple like soon to be counselors just trying to get to there. He just kind of takes them all out.
Yep.
And the thing that I was like, so there's a scene where after all of that happens, the sheriff is going through the crime scene, so to say, and Megan's dad is like talking to like one of his deputies, and he goes, he says something. He's like, "Oh, happy Friday the 13th." This is the first time in the franchise up to this point that you get that meta moment of Jason actually murders on Friday the 13th.
Yep.
This begs the question, though. How does he have sense of time, for one? And two, does he only murder on Friday the 13th, just like Michael only murders on Halloween?
I I don't necessarily know how to answer that. I would say the answer is no, because the murders in like 2, 3, and 4 were never tied directly to the date Friday the 13th. So I don't think he necessarily just murders on Friday the 13th. Again, I think it may have just been another one of those meta lines, the same way the girl in the beginning was like, I've seen enough horror movies to know, blah, 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 blah. I think that was another moment here where it's like, oh, yeah, could he have picked a better date, Friday the 13th? Hey. The other thing also is, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, Friday the 13th is also Jason's birthday. That was the whole point when his mom is murdering everybody in the first one, she says, today is his birthday. So
yeah, she does.
So and I don't know if they were pointing that out for that specific reason. I don't think they were either, but it was just, I honestly think it was just a straight up another meta line they threw in for fun. Because if you watch this one too, this is probably the first Friday the 13th where I felt like they were actually truly going for more comical moments than the other 5, or at least the other 4, the first 4, because like the paintballers in the woods, there were a couple of other moments where I was like, okay, it looked like they were going for funny haha in certain, like, when he sees the machete and you pop for that. Like, I just think that there are moments in here where I'm like, okay, I see they're trying to add a little bit of comedy in here. So
there's 2 lines in particular that just made me like laugh out loud. And honestly, I was like, I had to like go back and rewind. I was like, I don't know if I heard that right. And I don't remember who said this first line, but there's a moment where he's like, it's a male character and he's pouting and he just looks at the camera and he like scuffs away and he goes, does he think I'm a fart head?
Oh yeah.
Like, just that line, like, who calls another person a fart head? I just thought that was funny. But also there's a
6-year-old would.
Yes.
You're a fart head.
The moment where Court's girlfriend or lover, it's never defined, where she's getting murdered by Jason in the back of the RV, and he's like rocking out and just like enjoying the joyride. His first notion is like, and just hearing like silence, is just saying, her name's Nikki. That's it. And he goes, hey, Nikki, what are you doing back there? Taking a dump?
Because that's what stupid, young adults do.
I really enjoyed this movie though. I think that it's one of the better entries that we've gotten into the series. It's a high point, especially coming off of A New Beginning.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, anything off in part 5 is definitely an upgrade for sure. But again, we got 2 really good leads. We got a decent supporting cast that you cared for a bit. And you got Jason in all his murderous glory. I mean, that's pretty much the recipe for all of these films.
Yeah, there's one more while we're on the brink of closing this episode. There's another moment that Elizabeth specifically says, nobody wants to die. And I feel like I want to just speak to that for a second, because I think for those of us that are struggling and are listening to this right now, and they're struggling with suicide, you have that overwhelming sense of wanting to die or just not wanting to be alive. It feels so hopeless. And I understand what that feels like. I understand of that just not wanting to be alive anymore, not feeling like you have purpose or feel like that you belong anywhere anymore. And in doing Victims, I've learned the value of life. I've learned the value of one person's thoughts over another, and how they are this one and the same, really. Even if you disagree, it doesn't devalue the other person's point of view. And I just have to encourage someone in that nobody wants you to die, because regardless of the situation, someone would be sad if you weren't here. So I just want to encourage to please reach out or consult our resources if you need to, because this is the heart of why we do this show. It's the heartbeat of why we run the nonprofit, because we're all fans of something, because we all have fandoms that we adore and that we love. And we want to use these as connecting points to point to bigger things, like your value as a human being. So please consult the resources in the descriptions below. That's my TED Talk.
It's a very good TED Talk.
Thank you. All right. Well, let's put this through the ranking. Where would you say that this ends up for you in the 6 that we've covered so far?
In the 6 that we've covered so far, today I'll put it at number 2.
Behind which film? Part 4?
Part 4.
All right. I'm going to put this at this holds at number 1 for me.
Of course.
And I think it's going to be really hard to do this. I have a Letterboxd list where I'm like ranking all of the first viewings that I've seen this year. And this film, I've seen 85 new films not made in 2021 this year. Yeah, I have a lot of time. And I have to say that this one still ranks in my, I think it's top 6. So I truly do love this film. And I was so thrilled to go back and rewatch this one. Will I be thrilled to watch part 7? I guess you'll have to tune in later in this year when we cover it. But Anthony, where can people find the Retro Gamers online?
You can find the Retro Gamers Podcast on Facebook.com/Retro Gamers Podcast, on Instagram at Retro Gamers Podcast, on Twitter at Retro Gamers Pod. And you can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts, or watch us on YouTube and IGTV.
All right. Well, you guys can follow me on Letterboxd, as I previously mentioned, at Captain Nostalgia. And you guys can also go to victimsandvillains.net, where you guys will find all of our social media, including Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Twitch, Letterboxd. You guys can also you guys will also find past episodes of our flagship show that you're currently listening to right now, our spinoff podcast, That's High Praise, a Nicolas Cage podcast, Coffee and Conversations, and more, along with movie reviews, and most importantly, our mental health resource library. And while you're at it, please check out huhuh-podcast. In loving this, once again, this episode is dedicated to the loving memory of Dino Gangle. I hope you guys have a great night. And when we come back, we're kicking off Mental Health May next episode. So until next time.